These early season games are not going that great. I haven't got a single win. I think I got one actually right before I went out of town. I got a single win, and this just isn't going that great. So we'll see if I can nail something out soon.
AKA Kaidi, Valk, and the Ghost of Viper.
Okay, been going over strategy. I am ready for
Anything to the win. Then to the real after party.
This is your champion.
I'm Jumpmaster. I'll take it from here.
I love this part!
Round 1. Beginning ring countdown.
Next ring's far. Wow, really far. No worries, I can be fast.
Attention. First blood.
Radiant isolate. We will not let off the gas.
And then it comes up.
Some aren't made for this.
Backpack here. Level 2.
I've enhanced my weapon. Ring is fast. Can you cover that distance in 45 seconds?
Sniper stock here. Level Hemlock here. Elite. Wings up.
Optics here.
Sniper.
Oh, now my weapon's enhanced. Just like me.
Extended heavy mag here. Wings up.
Warning. Movement in progress.
We'll be
Weapons
posted by the ring if
enhanced.
we don't
Now
move.
let's leave a mark on the world. Wings out. Lock on enemy's position. We should maneuver that area.
Ultimate accelerant here.
We should cruise over there. Dibs. Whoa, I'm on a new level. Wings out. Fangs out. I got an upgrade.
Care package falling.
Extra supplies here. I'll share.
Wings up.
Kill leader.
Care package there.
New kill
A
leader.
short run for me.
Wonder what the play was.
Care package there. A short run for me.
Firing. Reloading. Wings out.
Taking shots here. Watch your shields. Enemy here.
kill leader appointed.
Sommer ist der neue Kill-Leader. Gebt Vollgas.
Wings out. Under fire. Activating shield. Reloading.
Competitor down. Ciao, ciao.
Hold up. Healing.
I killed an opponent. Barrel stabilizer here. Level 3. Reduces recoil. Engage. Alright,
Wings
another
out.
squad is here. Look alive. Enemy shield broken. Reloading. Recharging my shield. 1 second.
Shields on that bandit.
Hurling a pack grenade. Hurling a pack grenade.
Frag out.
Alert 5, Valkyrie actual. Ready for burn. How copy? Burn is a go.
Axe out.
A crew member will be coming by with our beverage
Taking shots
cart.
here.
Drinks are not complimentary, though you'll wish to God they will be. Fox 3, missile off the rails. Wings up. As the squads have pieced out, there's the second wind I needed.
Enemy shield
Go
broken.
get my crosshairs.
An airstrike. Downed an enemy.
Refueling my shield. I'm down.
Another
Repeat,
rival down.
I am down.
Today, been down. Go, rival here.
Wings up. Wings up. Recharging shields.
This fucking team, man. Fucking
You have to survive to get to the after. The Apex Games. Come for revenge? Stay for the beautiful women.
As one, we will be gifted with victory.
Watch your step. I will.
This is your champion.
I'm Jump Master. Follow my lead. Ah, I love this part! Yeah!
And Snotty landed you.
I got an enhanced weapon and a smile on my face.
Fired at me. I am down.
Wings out.
I downed an enemy.
Reloading. Wings out.
Hostile close.
Release shield.
I've been down.
Wings up. Next ring's not close, people. Charging on my shields. A minute till ring close and we've still got a ways to go. I'm here. So let's get you a do-over, huh? Bogey's shield.
Wait. That was fun.
but it's definitely easier said than done. Just then, Liam notices a disturbance coming from the direction of the village the elves are building, so he teleports over to see what's going on, and to his horror, he finds the village in complete ruin. The elves tell them that this was caused by some wolfmen that attacked all of a sudden, and speaking of wolfmen, they show back up and begin demanding that the
I want to
intruders
show you
leave
this
this
type of
holy land.
levitation that I bet you haven't seen before. Like maybe you've already heard of ultrasonic standing waves, superconductor flux pinning, spin stabilized magnetic suspension, hovercraft, electromagnetic suspension, telekinesis, or simply believing in yourself. But this type of levitation is different to all of those, and I really like this one because straight away it feels like it just shouldn't work. And even better, it was discovered by accident by Bob Collins when he was asked to investigate why British torpedoes kept missing their target. I found out about this because Bob's son emailed me, and that's how we ended up in Bob's front room in Bournemouth, and how I, Steve Mould, personally invented a new way to play hockey. Well, tell me the story.
I started working with a young man on a bench assembling parts. This was part of a torpedo project. People had decided that the fault was in the transducers, and I was asked to investigate.
When Bob says transducers, he's talking about ultrasonic transducers. In other words, a piezoelectric device that's a bit like a speaker, except it's designed to create ultrasonic sound that can pass through water. These transducers send out pings of ultrasonic sound that reflect off targets. The reflected sound is then picked up by the same transducers. In other words, it's part of the guidance system.
One of the first things I did, I held the transducer in my hand, and I happened to have a glass lens on the desk, which I placed on the transducer and immediately slid off. Quite mystified by that, I picked that up and tried to keep it on the transducer, and I couldn't. And then I placed it down onto a glass paperweight, and it started skidding around. And that created quite a bit of interest in the lab. A few people gathered round. We were trying to explain what it was. We didn't really understand it.
When you discovered it by accident, were you deliberately at resonance, or did you just happen to be...
Well, I had that exact signal generator. That is the one.
So this is a signal generator that generates about 30,000 hertz. But these ultrasonic transducers only really get going when you hit their resonating frequency. So when we turn this fine-tuning dial, you can see the moment it hits resonance because the thing starts to move and slide around. Oh, there you go. Look at that. Oh, that's crazy. Actually, when I first saw this, I did think about the BristleBot, which isn't really levitation. It's just repeatedly hitting a surface, which it does reduce friction, but it's not levitation. BristleBots are really fun, by the way. Like, if you angle the bristles, it actually generates propulsion. But anyway, how do we know that this thing isn't just like a BristleBot? How do we know that it's genuinely levitation? Well, Bob conducted an experiment where the transducer was resting on a metal surface, and that completed a circuit. But when he turned on the ultrasonic generator, the circuit broke. So that proved there was a gap between the transducer and the metal surface. I didn't try and measure the gap, but looking at other people's research, it seems to be about 100 microns. So although it doesn't look as impressive as hoverboarding in terms of sheer numbers, it is technically levitation, and they actually use it to move silicon wafers around in chip factories. While Bob was showing me his setup, I had an idea. Could I use this to make an airless air hockey table? Though I suppose you wouldn't call it air hockey because there isn't an air pump. Ultrasonic hockey? Well, I had a go, and it turned out to be a lot harder than I thought it would be. But first, how does this thing work? Well, you might have heard of ultrasonic levitation before, but there are actually two types. And the type that you'll have seen before is this one. There are ultrasonic sound waves bouncing up and down in this column, creating a standing wave. You know standing waves, right? This is my favorite example of a standing wave. It's a bit gratuitous, isn't it, a flame tube? But anyway, you can trap very light objects in that standing wave. But the ultrasonic levitation that Bob just showed me is the other type of ultrasonic levitation. By the way, if you're interested in how any of these other types of levitation work, I'll be touching on a few of them in future videos. So make sure to subscribe if you're interested in that, and maybe click the notification bell. So if it's not a Bristlebot and it's not being trapped in a standing wave, how the heck is this thing levitating? Okay, so here's what I've figured out. When you bring two surfaces together slowly, all the air between those two surfaces gets squeezed out and then they're touching. And that's what happens in our everyday experience. The air just gets out of the way. But what happens when you bring two surfaces together really quickly? Well, if the air doesn't have time to escape, then it gets squished. It gets compressed. Like a tiny bit escapes out of the sides, and given enough time, all the air would escape. It might feel a bit counterintuitive that air behaves in this way, but actually you're probably quite familiar with it. For example, if you've ever played with a brand new deck of cards. Okay, but what happens if the surface is moving back and forth really quickly, like with the ultrasonic transducer? Well, then you're bringing the surfaces together really quickly, but then immediately pulling them apart again. So here's the cycle. The air gets squeezed and a little bit escapes out the sides, and then the air gets stretched and some of it comes back in. Now, if I was holding the transducer just above the plate, you might expect that cycle to just continue forever. But if I let go, well, all the weight of this thing is now pressing down as well. In other words, with the help of gravity, the downstroke is squeezing the air harder than the upstroke is stretching the air. So the pressure difference on the downstroke is greater than the reverse pressure difference on the upstroke. Actually, there's a second reason why the pressure difference on the downstroke is greater than the pressure difference on the upstroke, and that's related to the fact that the relationship between pressure and volume is non-linear. I won't get into the details of that, but the point is we should expect that with a larger pressure difference, there should be a greater movement of air. Like when I squeeze air out of this bag, if I squeeze harder, then more air comes out. So if the pressure difference is greater on the downstroke than it is on the upstroke, we should expect more air to be expelled on the downstroke than gets sucked in on the upstroke. So that over time, eventually, all the air gets pushed out and we're back to Bristlebot. But I'm saying that the opposite is true. Less air escapes on the downstroke than is sucked back in on the upstroke. And that's because the size of the opening also matters. So again, when I'm squeezing air out of this bag, less air escapes if I make the hole smaller. And of course, on the downstroke, the gap that the air can escape from gets smaller because the size of the gap is proportional to the distance between the two surfaces. And you might think that these two effects would cancel each other out. You've got increased pressure pushing the air out faster, but then you've got a smaller gap, so not as much air can come out. But what you find is that they don't cancel each other out. And that's because there's another factor that makes it even harder for the air to escape as the gap shrinks. And it's basically drag. Essentially, air doesn't flow smoothly over surfaces. Instead, the surface drags on the air. And so there's always a gradient in speed near a surface, like this. That means that when the gap shrinks, you're removing the fastest part of the flow. We don't need to get into the maths of it, but the way it all shakes out is if you half the size of the gap, well, the pressure doubles, but the ability for the air to escape out the gap actually goes down by 1/8. So in total, the flow rate is quartered. So more air gets sucked in on the upstroke than gets pushed out on the downstroke. That means that this ultrasonic transducer is essentially acting like a pump that is pulling air into that gap. And as more and more air gets drawn in, the pressure goes up until that pressure is enough to hold the weight of the transducer, and then we're balanced. The amount of air being squeezed out matches the amount of air that's being pulled in. We're in equilibrium and we're levitating. The animations I've been showing you are actually a 2D gas simulation. I didn't have high hopes, honestly, when I first started coding it up, but all I've got here is a bar-shaped mass that falls under gravity. And amazingly, it seems to work. After the simulation has been running for a little while, the number of particles of gas leaving the gap seems to be the same as the number of particles that come back in, and so the bar levitates. But what about my idea for a variation on air hockey? Well, here's my thinking. Turn that ultrasonic transducer upside down, stick a metal plate to it, laser cut some little acrylic discs, and you've got yourself a miniature game of hockey. It's a bit like air hockey, except you don't need a pump to be pumping air. Everything just levitates because of the ultrasound. But it turns out it's not that simple. For a start, how do you go about buying torpedo parts without ending up on a list somewhere? And actually, I couldn't find any transducers like that anywhere. The closest thing I could find is the type of transducer that's used in cleaning baths. But like, why can't I just use a normal speaker? Why do I have to use a piezoelectric speaker? In fact, speakers are so ubiquitous. How come we haven't seen this type of levitation loads of times before? Well, it turns out it's to do with something called impedance matching, which I made a whole video about, link in the description if you want to find out more. But basically the issue is this. On the downstroke, the pressure really spikes because it's inversely proportional to the volume. And a normal speaker only has enough muscle to push air back and forth at standard atmospheric pressure, so it would fail on the downstroke. Whereas a piezoelectric transducer is strong enough to push water back and forth, and water is 800 times more dense than air. In other words, the difference between a normal speaker and a piezoelectric speaker is like the difference between a human voice box and a dolphin voice box. That's why humans can't be heard underwater, and presumably why dolphins can't be heard on land. And ultimately, that's why we can't talk to dolphins. Actually, dolphin anatomy is really interesting, but it's probably a tangent too far even for me. But honestly, I could talk about dolphins all day because I just love animals. Actually, if you're anything like me, it'll probably make you quite sad to know that a lot of dolphins have to shout to be heard over the noise of the engines of tourist boats. I mean, look, there's a lot to be sad about when it comes to the impact that humans are having on the natural world, which is why I joined Planet Wild, and it's why I'm partnering with them for this video. Because although the challenge is great, we don't have to feel hopeless. Every month, Planet Wild's community of over 20,000 members, including me, funds a mission to bring back endangered species, protect our oceans, or restore forests. By the way, if you're interested in biology videos, Planet Wild has a weirdly good YouTube channel, but actually it's an important part of what they do because every month we get to see our money at work because they make a documentary about it and post it on their channel. For example, a couple of months ago, they funded special dolphin microphones to figure out how to help them communicate without having to shout. Piezoelectric microphones, of course, because of the thing we were talking about. Planet Wild doesn't just highlight the problems, it funds the solutions, which is why I became a member. If you want to become part of a growing community that makes a difference, consider joining Planet Wild. You can give any amount, big or small, whatever feels right to you, and the first 150 people to sign up using code MOLD4 will get their first month paid for by me. Just scan this QR code, or out how to drive one of these things was also a bit of a nightmare. Like, I considered using the circuitry from inside one of those ultrasonic bath cleaners, but then you can't specify the exact frequency with those, and I needed to be able to do that because of the resonance of the hockey table. So I looked at more custom circuitry, but then the transducer, it's actually a capacitor as well, and when it hits resonance, all its characteristics change, so you can't just use a standard amp that you might use for like audio, because you can end up with voltage ringing and current spikes in your circuit, and you destroy your transducer. Anyway, I eventually figured out that I could use a motor driver. And I hate to admit it, but I did get some help from that scoundrel Electroboom. He's probably going to make a video about transducer circuits soon, so be sure to subscribe if you want to catch that. The other big problem is you can't just vibrate the plate up and down because it doesn't just move up and down, it wobbles instead. In other words, you end up with Chladni figures. Link in the description for 2 of my previous videos on Chladni figures if you want to find out more about those. But the point is, the salt moves to the parts of the plate that aren't moving. What this tells us is that if you drive a plate like this at 40 kilohertz, you end up with quite a short wavelength. And if the wavelength is shorter than the width of the plate, then you end up with standing waves. There are points on the plate that aren't moving. these node lines shown with the sand. And of course, if one of our acrylic pucks ended up on one of these node lines, well, we wouldn't get any levitation. So what's the solution? Well, instead of standing waves, we want to try and get traveling waves. And to get traveling waves, we need to drive both ends of this plate with ultrasonic transducers. We want to drive both ends at the same frequency, but we don't want them to be in phase with each other like this. Instead, we want one of them to lag behind the other by a quarter of a wave, which looks like this. Not this, this. Like, I think you still get standing waves and node lines and Chladni figures, but layered on top of that is this much larger traveling wave, so you end up with no dead spots. So here's the final setup. One transducer at each end, and my signal generator can output two separate signals linked to each other. So they have exactly the same frequency, but one lags behind the other by a quarter of a wave. I've added walls using acrylic, which is very light, so it shouldn't change the resonant characteristics of the plate. And look, there's holes here and here for the goals. How cool is that though? A miniature game of hockey using ultrasonic levitation. That's crazy, isn't it? We've gone from broken torpedoes to, frankly, a sporting revolution. But hold on, what was wrong with those torpedoes in the end? Was it the transducers? Well, I never found out. I think it might be classified. But I did learn something interesting about dolphins that might be relevant. They have a special organ in their heads called a melon, and the melon's made of a special kind of fat that matches the acoustic impedance of seawater to the acoustic impedance of their vocal anatomy. So maybe these broken torpedoes just needed a melon. Actually, speaking of which, the first 150 people to sign up to Planet Wild using code MOLD4 will get their first month paid for by me. Just scan this QR code or click the link in the description. And if you want to see Planet Wild in action, check out their dolphin microphone video.
Immediately. Liam can tell that the Wolfmen have mistaken them for intruders, so he tries explaining that they were given permission to stay here, but before he could say anything, the Wolfman proceeds to attack him. So Liam is forced to teleport out of the way and defend himself with a little magic. The Wolfman still seems determined to kick Liam and his friends out of this holy land, but then Liam pulls out a Raiden Jr., proving that he's affiliated with Raiden. The Wolfman now realizes his mistake and sincerely apologizes for destroying the village, but the elves say it's fine since the wolves were just doing their duty since they serve Raiden. The girls suggest that the Wolfmen should become Liam's familiars as well. The leader of the Wolfmen thinks it's a good idea, so they agree to become Liam's familiar, and Liam has no reason to refuse, so he creates a contract with the leader, naming her Chris. The next day, Liam returns to the village to see how things are going, and with the addition of Chris and all the other Wolfmen, progress on the village has been going a lot quicker. As soon as Chris sees Liam, she jumps up to give him a hug, and when he asks how the construction has been going, Chris points in that direction and says they are still rebuilding one of the homes they destroyed yesterday. Once again, she sincerely apologizes for acting so rashly yesterday, but Liam says it's fine as long as the Wolfmen can help repair the homes. Although things would definitely go a lot faster if Liam could just use magic to repair the homes instead, but there's no spell for that in the ring. Raiden tells him he can just create a repair spell for himself if it doesn't already exist. Liam had no idea it was possible for him to just create his own spells, so Raiden explains that all he needs to do is clearly imagine every step of the process of what he's trying to accomplish, and once he has done that, he casts the spell on a piece of wood and asks Chris to smash it for him. Chris does as instructed, but to her surprise, right after smashing it, the piece of wood repairs itself as good as new. Liam explains that this is the effect of the spell he just came up with, Keep Memory. It allows inanimate objects to maintain a particular state no matter what, so if he uses this on the homes, no matter what happens, the buildings will stay standing. After getting the hang of this spell creation thing, Liam begins experimenting with all kinds of spells and ends up creating explosive magic missiles. He intends to continue inventing more spells, but all of a sudden, he gets called because there's an emergency. Humans have invaded the land and are hunting down some pixies that live here. This is really serious, so Liam rushes out to investigate and discovers the intruder.
Fair enough, I'll only eat half the loaf, but like, it is so much different than store-bought stuff. Like, it's actually like chewy, you know? Like, the actual bread part is like yummy. I've never, this is so good.
Intruders. He stands in their way and warns them to turn back because this is his nation. The men think Liam is just a stupid child, so they ignore him and continue moving, but then Liam fires a warning shot to make it clear that he is not messing around. The men don't take kindly to this, so instead of just turning around and leaving, they decide to attack, and they leave Liam with no choice but to take each and every one of them out. After all the soldiers have been taken care of, Liam returns to the village where Rihanna thanks him for protecting the pixies. These pixies used to live in the forest, but they were attacked by the soldiers who were trying to capture them, so they fled here for safety. Liam tells the pixies they are all welcome to stay here for as long as they want, and he is even willing to form contracts with them. But there are a lot of pixies here, so Liam spends a lot of time naming them, and he's starting to run out of names. The next day, Liam calls a meeting with the girls in his pocket dimension and shows them the helmet to ask if they know anything about it. Scarlet recognizes the crest on the helmet as that of Palta